What's up you guys, I'm Dan, this is Frugal Not Cheap, and today we'll be talking about how to get started saving. This video is coming out in January 2021. Here's hoping for a brighter year this year. Anyway, I was thinking a lot of people might be looking to implement some New Year's resolutions to get started saving this year. No matter when you're watching this video, there's no better time to start saving than today. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of people on their personal finances, putting together budgets, and helping them to achieve financial goals. One of the stumbling blocks that I've seen over time that tends to really impact a lot of people, though, is they put off working on something if they don't think they're able to achieve a lot very quickly. They think, well, I can only save, say, $50 a month. What's the point of that? I should just spend it on whatever. I'll save later when I make more money. There are a few problems with this kind of thinking. You may or you may not make more money later, whenever that is, accounting for inflation. Also, if you don't change your habits, what tends to happen is that your spending will rise as your income increases as well, and you never really get anywhere. It's what we call the hedonic treadmill. And most importantly, there's no amount that's too small to get started with. Small savings, done consistently over a long period of time, will really add up. As with many things, one of the hardest things can be to break that initial bit of inertia and get going. But once you've accomplished a little bit of something, it's much easier to keep going. You start thinking, hey, this is something that's possible, this is something that I can do. And then you'll start to find ways to make it even more possible and accelerate your progress. By contrast, when you think something is impossible, it's really hard to come up with creative ways to get it done. So that's the first thing, is let's just get started saving. Doesn't matter how much. In fact, it's probably not a good idea to try to take on too much at once and start with a number that you think is really sustainable, rather than trying to do too much all at once and drastically change your life in a way that you just can't keep up with. So again, how much and how often doesn't matter all that much when we're just getting started out. The important part is that we have consistency and sustainability. There are a couple of different ways we might go about figuring out how much to start saving. First, we could do a budget. If you don't find this scary, then I think it's a great way to go. It'll give you a good idea of what your expenses are, what your income is, where you might trim a little bit of the low-hanging fruit, the easy things to trim off your budget that wouldn't hurt too much to reduce. You might find, subscriptions that we can cut out, or that you're spending just a little bit more than you thought on this one thing, like the classic example is your latte factor, the coffees or whatever, but it could be anything. It doesn't have to be that. That one's kind of trite. So if you don't find the idea of doing a budget scary, and it wouldn't be something that puts you off from getting started saving, then I'd say go ahead and do it. I highly recommend it. But if it is something that's kind of scary and it's going to put you off, then forget about it. We don't need it. Let's not turn it into a stumbling block. Start with something small and achievable, something that you don't think you're really going to miss at the end of the week or the month or whatever. It could be $20 a week or $100 a month. Probably makes sense to time these savings with the way your income comes in. If your income's irregular, that might be a little bit more of a challenge. Just kind of look at the average and get a sense of how much you could put away. But if you get paid weekly or every other week or twice a month or once a month, then it's pretty easy. Just pick an amount that you're comfortable with and set it to happen on that date and get it done. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started saving with a small amount. But what are these savings for? Well, there are different kinds of savings. There are savings, which I say with air quotes because it's really just deferred spending. So this is putting money away for something like a cruise or a vacation or fancy gadgets, that kind of a thing. So really all we're doing is we're putting money aside so that we can then spend later. It's not really saving for the long run. Then there are real long-term savings, things like an emergency fund, which would give you a nice cushion when things go wrong. Something always goes wrong. It's nice to have a cash cushion that can help take care of those things so we don't have to go into debt. Then there's also, of course, things like a down payment on a home. That's a good long-term goal that someone might have. I don't know. And then, of course, you might want to have a cash cushion as part of your retirement portfolio as well. Definitely wouldn't want to have the whole thing be in cash because it's not going to grow, but you may or may not, depending on the risk tolerance and the time horizon, want some cash cushion as well in there. Now, if you don't have an emergency fund, though, this is, say, 3 to 6 months of expenses saved aside in cash, something that's liquid and readily accessible, then I highly recommend that you prioritize that first. Life is life, and things always come up. Something breaks and needs to be replaced, or there's an accident, there's a small medical bill, or something's always coming up, and it's best to be prepared for these things rather than being blindsided by them, because, well, they always happen. And no, the emergency fund isn't designed to pay for things like new tires or windshield wipers from your annual vehicle inspection or whatever. These are things that we can plan for, right? So there are a lot of infrequent expenses that are not emergencies that we can plan for. The emergency fund really is supposed to be for emergencies. So what I did personally when I was starting out, in order to account for both of those things, is I had separate accounts. I would figure out roughly how much these infrequent expenses, like my car maintenance and the registration on it, and car insurance, the things that I didn't pay monthly, I kind of worked out what this should be on average for the year, then just divided by that by 12 or by 52 if you're going to put money away weekly. And I just started putting that into one account, and then I had another account, which was really my emergency fund. But if that's too complicated for you and you really just want to have it all in one bucket, that's another way to go. Just know that for a while it's going to be a dual purpose fund. It's going to cover those infrequent expenses, and then eventually, once it's big enough, then it'll be enough to cover both the emergencies and those things. That's another way to go. All right, so we're going to get started saving. We figured out an amount. We're going to time that along with the way our income comes in. So we figured out a time frame for doing it. And we've also figured out our purpose. Maybe it's our emergency fund, maybe it's a house down payment, or what have you. The next question probably is, where should I put the money? You might be tempted to put the money somewhere where it's going to maybe make some large returns so that you can reach your savings goals faster, right? It'd be great if you could put away 1 month's worth of expenses and wake up, 5 months later and the whole thing is turned into your 6 months worth of expenses. That was your target in the first place. But that's probably not a great idea. In general, you want to think about two things. One is your personal risk tolerance, and the other thing is the time horizon. So the longer the time horizon is, generally the more it makes sense to take risk. So that's why for things like retirement, a lot of people have a large share of their portfolio in stocks, which are riskier, right, day to day, but in the long run they have higher returns rather than bonds, which have smaller returns, but they're very predictable and much more level. And then you might change the ratios as you get closer to retirement, increase the amount of bonds and reduce the amount of stocks. In other words, as your time horizon gets shorter, you might reduce the amount of risk you might be willing to take would be less because, hey, as we get closer, we're going to get to that time where we actually need the money. And we don't want to be going to go get the money on the day where the market has dropped like 50%, right? Not the best timing in the world. And so that's why, in general, shorter time horizons means that we want to have things that are much more stable and less risky. So for something like an emergency fund, when we don't know when we're going to need it, so it's got to be ready for us right there, or for a home down payment, if we're looking at buying the house within, say, 5 years or so, then it makes much more sense to put this into something very stable, like a high yield savings account, rather than into stock markets or Bitcoin or whatever. All right, so for a savings account, there are a lot of options out there. Now, personally, I much prefer having a higher yield on my savings. Some of you might want to support a local bank, or you really care about the brick and mortar experience. I can understand those thoughts. That's not the way that I feel about things. And so I would recommend, if you're just looking at yield, it makes a lot more sense to look at an online high yield savings account, something like Ally Bank or Capital One 360, because the rates are much, much larger than those that you'd see at your more old school type of brick and mortar banks. Now, there are other options. There are some really attractive rates out there. So you can look at YouTube channels such as those run by Ask Sebi and others. I'll put a link to an interesting video by Ask Sebi on some of these higher yield savings accounts that are out there. But for this, when you're just starting, the thing is that a lot of those higher yield accounts have either a cap on the amount that you can save that gives you this higher interest rate, or they have some hoops that you have to jump through in order to actually get the rate, like run a certain number of debit card transactions through a linked savings account or what have you, or do transfers. I don't know. So personally, I think it's better, especially if you're just starting out with saving, keep it simple. So do, Ally Bank or Capital One 360 or something like that. Just go to bankrate.com, for instance. You can see a list of the current highest APY, annual percentage yield savings accounts that are out there. Pick something that's got really good reviews for customer service that you feel comfortable with, and that's FDIC insured, of course, and go from there. Personally, I've used both Ally and Capital One 360 and recommended them to friends. They've got competitive rates, very easy to use interfaces. It's easy to create new accounts if you want to really dial down and say, all right, I'm saving here for my emergency fund, and I'm saving here for my car expenses, and I'm going to put some money over here for my dog, or whatever it might be. I had a lot of complexity early on, and then as time went on and the balances got big enough, then I just consolidated because I'd accomplished those goals and it was no longer necessary to really look at each one individually all the time. But anyway, that worked for me. Do whatever works for you and keeps you motivated. But more important than motivation, of course, is discipline. Just keep it up consistently. All right, so now we've decided how much we're going to save and when and also where. And the final thing, and I think this might be the most important thing, is to make it automatic. So if every month or every week I've got to actually go over there and click the transfer button on this thing, or worse, get some cash and go and deposit it in my savings account at the bank, it's just much less likely to happen. And what I'm doing then kind of is I'm putting this lower down on the priority list. So I would highly recommend, this is what I do personally anyway, is to make all these transfers automatic, and they happen exactly on the date that my paycheck gets direct deposited. So as the income comes in, I'm thinking that this amount that I'm saving is really just coming off the top, and it's never really part of my working balance. So I never even noticed that it was ever there. And this way, what I'm also doing is I'm following a personal finance principle that I think is quite important and powerful, which is to pay yourself first. First, we're going to take care of my goals and the saving that I'd like to accomplish. And then once I've done that, then the rest of the money, after I've paid all the bills and all that kind of stuff, then maybe that could be for fun. But we're really making it a priority to get this savings goal accomplished. And we're doing that by making it automatic and paying ourselves first. What stumbling blocks have you seen that prevented you from saving? If you've already been saving, how did you get started? Let us know in the comments below. Hope you found this video helpful. If you liked it, please hit the like button. If you'd like to see more videos about frugality, savings, investments, travel, and financial independence, hit the subscribe button. Ring the notification bell icon if you'd like to be notified when new videos are posted. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.